Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something seriously fascinating and honestly pretty complex. We're going to be analyzing how the PBS Frontline documentary, The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, portrays the incredible duality of the country's recent political shifts under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who pretty much everyone just calls MBS. This documentary is literally a masterclass in understanding modern geopolitics because it really pulls back the curtain on one of the most secretive yet wildly influential nations on the planet. So let's just jump right in, shall we?
So right off the bat, the documentary asks us to grapple with a pretty heavy question. Is MBS a modernizer, or is he a tyrant? For years, the West was absolutely mesmerized by the prospect of this new, forward-looking Saudi Arabia, and you can totally see why. Western leaders were looking at him and seeing regional stability, deeper oil alliances, and just incredibly lucrative tech investments. The source material shows us a leader who absolutely capitalized on those hopes, promising this glittering new era for his country. But, simultaneously, he was overseeing a period of intense repression behind closed doors. It's this rapid, almost dizzying transformation of a kingdom that historically moved at a completely glacial pace.
To really unpack this whole paradox, we've broken today's explainer down into 5 key areas. Number 1, his rise to absolute power. 2, the modernization vision. 3, a new foreign policy. 4, silencing domestic dissent. And 5, the Khashoggi assassination. Let's get started.
All right, part 1, rise to absolute power and how MBS consolidated his control.
Okay, so picture this. For decades, Saudi Arabia was ruled by a succession of elderly men who relied heavily on consensus within this massive royal family. Change, if it happened at all, was incredibly slow, it was deeply deliberative. But the documentary shows how this entire power structure changed practically overnight. In 2015, this largely unknown young prince is appointed defense minister. By June 2017, he outmaneuvers and actually replaces his chief rival, Mohammed bin Naif, taking the title of crown prince for himself. And then came the real shockwave. Just a few months later, in November 2017, he orchestrates the infamous Ritz-Carlton Purge. Hundreds of the kingdom's wealthiest businessmen, military officials, and powerful princes were just suddenly detained. But they weren't thrown into some traditional jail. They were held captive in a luxury 5-star hotel. He basically turned a global symbol of immense wealth into a gilded prison, where they were allegedly coerced into handing over billions of dollars in assets back to the state. He completely upended the old system of consensus in a matter of months.
There's this quote from a Western observer in the doc that really hits the nail on the head. The whole ball of wax was now in the hands of one man in a way that was really unprecedented. Just imagine the staggering speed of that consolidation. The royal court, the defense ministry, the interior ministry, the entire national economy, the whole bureaucratic and military weight of this incredibly wealthy kingdom was suddenly pivoting on the whims of one millennial leader. It was an absolute centralization of power into the hands of a guy who was still in his late 20s and early 30s. He left absolutely no checks and balances within the royal family.
Moving on to part 2, the modernization vision, and creating a new Saudi identity.
Now, this modernization vision is the side of MBS that initially captured the world's imagination, right? It earned him huge praise from global leaders and tech titans. The documentary details his incredibly ambitious economic and social plans, which are heavily anchored in this project called Vision 2030. Suddenly, the kingdom began actively de-emphasizing strict religious dogma. They curbed the power of the once feared religious police, and they filled that vacuum with a fierce, hyper-nationalist narrative. And the social changes? They were highly visible. MBS announced plans to open 350 cinemas, host massive public music concerts, woo Western investors, and launch the colossal Aramco IPO to finally diversify the economy away from its total reliance on oil. When you remember that the vast majority of the Saudi population is young, like under the age of 30, things like cinemas and concerts weren't just window dressing. They were massive, tangible shifts in the daily lived reality of millions of young people who had never, ever experienced that kind of public freedom before.
But here's where the documentary introduces a really jarring paradox. At the exact same moment, MBS was winning all this global applause for sweeping, public-facing reforms, the state was also engaging in brutal crackdowns. On the one hand, you have the Crown Prince lifting the long-standing, heavily criticized ban on women driving, obviously a massive PR victory on the world stage. But on the other hand, the documentary highlights that he simultaneously ordered the arrest and alleged torture of the very women's rights activists who had actually spent years campaigning for that right to drive. We're talking about prominent figures here, like Lujan al-Hathloul. The message the source material portrays is stark. Rights are not fought for and won in the new Saudi Arabia. They are bestowed as gifts from the top down. And demanding them, that remains a highly punishable offense.
All right, part 3, a new foreign policy, and some very aggressive regional maneuvers.
So MBS's newfound assertiveness definitely wasn't limited to domestic affairs. It extended aggressively beyond Saudi borders. Historically, Saudi foreign policy was, well, highly risk-averse. They much preferred checkbook diplomacy over direct conflict. But the dog outlines this massive shift toward unilateral aggression. Take Yemen, for example. MBS launched airstrikes against Iranian-backed Houthi rebels without even waiting for U.S. approval or a coalition consensus. It's a campaign that has resulted in massive civilian casualties, widespread famine, and an ongoing humanitarian crisis. And next to that, look at Qatar. Virtually overnight, Saudi Arabia spearheaded a total blockade against its neighbor, basically demanding absolute capitulation and the total closure of the Al Jazeera news network. This kind of unilateral aggression had immense global implications, suddenly destabilizing a region that the entire global economy relies on for energy security. It was a very clear signal to the world. The new Saudi leadership is more than willing to throw its weight around.
Which brings us to part 4, silencing domestic dissent and the rise of a new police state.
While the public face of the kingdom was, modernizing with all these concerts and cinemas, the documentary paints a much darker picture behind the scenes. They were building a newly formed police state designed to manage this absolute monarchy. And honestly, what's most chilling is the modernization of the authoritarianism itself. The state literally took the exact same digital platforms that were supposed to bring democratic freedom and weaponized them to build a highly sophisticated surveillance state. They deployed massive armies of Twitter bots, they called it an army of flies, led by a close aide named Saud al-Qahtani, to artificially manipulate online discourse and ruthlessly harass any critics. They allegedly purchased the NSO Group's Pegasus spyware to hack directly into the private smartphones of dissidents living abroad. They even pushed a citizen-sourced blacklist hashtag. They were openly encouraging everyday citizens to report on each other's social media activity, effectively turning the whole population into an arm of the state security apparatus.
But it wasn't just how they watched people. It was who they targeted. I want you to consider the number 37. That is the staggering number of offenses charged against a highly popular, very moderate cleric named Salman al-Awada. And what was his grand crime? He simply tweeted a mild prayer, hoping for a peaceful reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Qatar during the blockade. That's it, just a tweet. And for that, he faced the death penalty. The documentary makes it incredibly clear. In this new political landscape, the middle ground completely vanished. Neutrality, or merely hoping for peace, was now equated with active treason against the state.
A Saudi dissident in the film highlights just how deeply the old, unwritten rules were shredded. They said the Saudi government never went after family members. Now the system is actually engaged in collective forms of punishment. This is a fundamental shift in the rules of engagement for any kind of political opposition. It's an incredibly extreme form of coercion because it weaponizes a dissident's deepest vulnerability, their love for their family. By freezing bank accounts, issuing travel bans, and literally jailing the innocent relatives of critics who are living abroad, the state ensures silence, not just through direct threats to the individual, but through the terrifying collateral damage they can inflict on loved ones back home.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, the Khashoggi assassination, a tragic paradigm.
The documentary uses the terrible fate of journalist Jamal Khashoggi as the ultimate tragic case study of the kingdom's new duality under MBS. Now, to really understand why his death was so impactful, we have to understand who Khashoggi actually was. He wasn't some lifelong radical outsider throwing stones at the palace walls. He was an insider. He was very much a part of the establishment. Just look at this quote from him back in 2015 talking about the Crown Prince. And he is seen as a savior by young Saudis and by me. Khashoggi was initially a totally enthusiastic supporter. He genuinely believed in MBS's early modernization efforts, and he truly wanted the kingdom to succeed on the global stage.
But as the crackdowns intensified across the kingdom, so did Khashoggi's unease. He started offering some mild critiques, just warning against these overly aggressive policies and the silencing of moderate voices. And for this really gentle pushback, he was quickly muzzled, banned from writing columns, banned from tweeting, completely frozen out of the public sphere. This suppression is what led to his self-exile in the United States, where he became a very prominent Washington-based critic. And writing for the Washington Post, freed from that domestic censorship, his tone shifted pretty drastically. He wrote, "Saudi Arabia wasn't always this repressive. Now it's unbearable."
Now, according to U.S. intelligence findings featured heavily in the documentary, this very public, high-profile criticism deeply angered the absolute highest levels of the Saudi government. The documentary reports on an intercepted communication from MBS in 2017, so this is well before the actual murder, where the Crown Prince purportedly stated, "If we can't bring Jamal back by force, we should show him a bullet." It's absolutely crucial to note here that the documentary presents these intelligence findings to suggest a premeditated animus stemming right from the very top. This completely challenges the narrative that what happened was just an accident or some rogue operation.
From there, the documentary methodically outlines the tragic events that followed. Step 1. Khashoggi enters the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, simply seeking some routine paperwork so he can marry his fiancée. Step 2. A 15-man Saudi hit squad waiting for him inside executes and dismembers the journalist. Step 3. In this incredibly macabre attempt to cover their tracks, a body double leaves the consulate wearing Khashoggi's clothes. But in a totally bizarre oversight that contrasts sharply with the image of a highly sophisticated intelligence operation, the body double wore the wrong shoes. That immediately tipped off the Turkish police. Step 4. After weeks of fiercely denying any involvement at all and claiming Khashoggi left the building perfectly alive, the Saudi government finally changes its story. They shift the blame to a rogue operation carried out without the Crown Prince's authorization.
When the documentary's reporter actually pressed MBS directly regarding his involvement, the Crown Prince offered this defense. "It happened under my watch, I get all the responsibility, but I am not Google or a supercomputer to watch over 3 million. So he flatly denies ordering the murder. He claims ultimate bureaucratic responsibility because he's the leader, sure, while insisting he couldn't possibly know what every individual government employee was up to on any given day. But the documentary powerfully juxtaposes this exact defense against everything we learned back in Section 1. The absolute, totally unprecedented centralization of all state, military, and intelligence power right into the hands of this exact same man.
And all of this leaves us with a final, deeply provocative question to reflect upon. What is the true price of rapid modernization when it comes at the cost of absolute control? The source material we've explored today paints a vivid, honestly unforgettable picture. It's a society experiencing a level of social opening that would have been literally unimaginable a decade ago, right alongside a level of political repression that is entirely unprecedented. It's a deep, lingering paradox that completely defines the modern Saudi political shift. Thanks so much for joining me on The Explainer today. Keep asking those big questions, keep analyzing your sources, and I'll see you next time.